Horror movies used to be all about cheap scares and simple stories. But in the late 2010s, something changed. Jordan Peele's Get Out and films from A24, like Hereditary, The Witch, and Midsommar, showed that horror could be more than just scary. These movies made people think. They dealt with big ideas like racism, family struggles, grief, and even fear of the unknown, turning horror into a genre that felt smart and emotional. In this video, we'll talk about how Get Out and A24 movies gave horror a new life, mixing deeper themes with fresh ways of telling stories. Jordan Peele's Get Out changed how people perceived horror films. He showed that horror could tackle real-world problems in a way that was both scary and smart. Get Out follows Chris, a young black man visiting his white girlfriend's family. What starts as a strange and awkward weekend turns into a terrifying fight for survival. The movie doesn't just scare you. It also shines a light on racism. Peele shows how racism isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's the little things, like people making comments about black culture or treating someone differently without realizing it. The movie makes these moments feel creepy and uncomfortable. For example, when people say things like, "Black is in fashion," or "You must be so strong," it shows how some people see black people more as objects or trends than as individuals. One of the most memorable parts of the movie is the sunken place. When Chris is hypnotized, he falls into a dark void where he can't move or speak. He's trapped, watching helplessly as others control his body. This powerful image represents how it feels to be silenced or powerless in the face of racism. Many people connected with this idea, saying it reflects how society often ignores or controls marginalized voices. Get Out wasn't the first horror movie to talk about serious issues, but it did it in a way that felt fresh and real. It used scary moments to make people think about race, privilege, and the way black culture is treated. It wasn't just about the horror. It was about starting conversations and making people see the world differently. The movie became a massive hit. It made over $250 million, even though it cost only $4.5 million to make. It also won awards, including an Oscar for Best Original Screenplay, which is rare for a horror film. This showed that horror could be just as important as any other type of movie. After Get Out, more movies started using horror to tell meaningful stories. Films like Us, Hereditary, and The Invisible Man followed in its footsteps, proving that horror could be smart and creative. Jordan Peele became a leader in this new kind of horror, inspiring others to take risks and explore big ideas. While Get Out was changing how we think about horror, A24 was creating its own unique style. Instead of making typical scary movies, A24 focused on stories that were creepy, emotional, and thought-provoking. For example, The Witch is set in the 1600s and tells the story of a family living alone in the woods after being banished from their town. The movie isn't just about witches, it's about how fear and suspicion can tear a family apart. The slow, eerie scenes make you feel uneasy as the family's mistrust of each other grows. It shows how fear can destroy even the closest bonds. Hereditary is another A24 horror movie that feels different from most. It's about a family dealing with the loss of loved ones and dark secrets. While there are supernatural elements, the real focus is on how grief can mess with your mind and relationships. Toni Collette's performance as a grieving mother is so powerful that it makes the fear feel real. The movie is scary, not just because of ghosts or curses, but because it shows how family problems and loss can be just as terrifying. They took a different approach to horror with Midsommar. Unlike most scary movies, this one takes place almost entirely in bright daylight. The story follows Dani, a young woman grieving the loss of her family, as she joins her boyfriend and his friends on a trip to a strange festival in Sweden. At first, everything seems peaceful, but it slowly becomes clear that something is very wrong. The movie explores grief, toxic relationships, and strange traditions, showing that horror doesn't need darkness to be unsettling. A24 reminded audiences that the scariest stories are often the ones that make us think about our own fears and emotions. Their movies prove that horror could be both creepy and heartfelt at the same time. What makes movies like Get Out and those from A24 stand out is that they connect horror with real-life fears and emotions. Instead of just scaring people, these films explore important issues that feel personal and real, even if the stories are fictional. These movies feel different because they deal with issues people face every day. Get Out talks about racism and how Black people can feel uncomfortable or even unsafe in a world that often doesn't understand them. It uses horror to show how Black culture can be taken and used by others without respect. Hereditary shows how grief and trauma can be passed down from one generation to the next. It uses supernatural horror to represent the lasting impact of emotional pain on families. The Witch looks at how fear of the unknown can make people suspicious and cause them to turn against each other. It shows how fear can destroy relationships when people don't understand what's happening around them. These films hit harder because they talk about things we all experience, making the horror feel more real and relatable. In Us, Jordan Peele uses the story of a family hunted by their doppelgangers to explore deeper issues. The doppelgangers represent the parts of society that we try to ignore: poverty, inequality, and the people who are forgotten by the system. The movie shows how these ignored parts of society can rise up and cause trouble, reminding us of how fragile the divide is between the rich and the poor. Peele uses horror to talk about the problems of inequality and class in a way that's both scary and thought-provoking. A24 often focus on emotions like grief, loneliness, and fear. Instead of just relying on scary moments, these films dig into how emotions can break people down. The Lighthouse is about two men stuck on an island, slowly losing their minds because of isolation and a toxic relationship. The horror isn't just in the strange things happening around them, but in how their emotions and loneliness start to drive them crazy. Midsommar is another example, focusing on grief and manipulation. Though the movie takes place in bright daylight, the emotional pain of the main character makes it feel disturbing and eerie. These films inspired other filmmakers to think differently about horror. Movies like The Babadook and A Quiet Place are great examples of how horror can tell deeper stories. Filmmakers now see that horror doesn't have to be about monsters or gore. It can also be about emotions, relationships, and society. People have also changed. People who didn't like horror before are now watching these movies because they offer more than just scares. They tell stories that make you feel something and stay with you long after the movie ends. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.